with Harold N. Metzel, Metzel, 3212 North Miller Road, Apartment 109, Scottsdale, Arizona, 85251, phone 602-947-5386, on Thursday, February the 21st, 1991 at 1:30 p.m. with Helen Earley of the Oldsmobile History Center. Interview taking place at Mr. Metzel's home in Scottsdale.
To fumble too much.
Just fine, Mr. Metzel.
The first, I'll say that I am no inventor. The success of Oldsmobile engineering and manufacturing is a departmental effort, or was when I was there. The press would like to credit one person. It usually doesn't happen that way. We had outstanding personnel, many of the best in the industry at what they did. For instance, Burl, Watt, Hindi, Elliott, and many others. I credit engineering success to unique organization, which required approval of the experimental department before any feature was actually used in a car. Credit Jeff Wolfram with this procedure. I and John built after me followed the procedure religiously. The experimental department actually had to approve every part of the car. We knew our cars, particularly from long cross-country trips that we took very frequently. My particular contribution to Oldsmobile's success was in developing people's full potential. One measure of that is the number of Oldsmobile personnel who became vice presidents or higher in General Motors Corporation. For example, Kennedy, Belt, Estes, Worden, Buxton, Cook, Truxell, Schultz, Stemple, and Howard Carroll. I think that is most of our contributions to the corporation vice presidency. I was particularly fortunate in that the corporation and local management did not micromanage us. When I was general manager of Olds, the corporation exerted only the discipline of the budget. Of course, many questions were asked, but I felt we ran our own show and were successful as judged by public acceptance of the cars and the financial results to the corporation. I was doubly fortunate in that the politicians were not seriously into the design of our cars. That happened only a little bit at the end of my career at Olds. We truly ran our own business and in a responsible manner. That is what I'd like to say at the opening.
I really appreciate your sharing those sentiments and your judgment with us.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. There we go. Do you got some more there too you'd like to cover, haven't you?
Well, I put a number of things down. I started at Oldsmobile in the engineering, in the engine laboratory
What year was
in 1928. And I worked there for nearly 41 years, till May of 1969, when I reached the age of 65. I had a large number of jobs as a person would who did that long. Originally, I was in charge of the engine laboratory. I went from there to the experimental department, probably in 1940 to 49. No, went to the experimental department in about 1937. I later became experimental engineer, motor engineer, transmission engineer, assistant chief engineer, and then about 1950, for the next 15 years, I ran the engineering department. Most of the time, Mr. Wolfram was my immediate supervisor, except during the war years. In 1940 to 45, I worked directly for Harold Youngren, chief engineer, as engineer on aircraft Canada, which we had a contract to develop. Some of the employees who worked for me were the outstanding people: Kitty Belt, Louis Burl, George Jones, Tom Tompkins, Pete Estes, Watt. Later on, when I became general manager, Warden, Hook, Elliott, and Buxton were particularly outstanding. One of the very interesting things, I happen to be a transmission engineer at the time that Olds took on and developed a hydromatic to Oldsmobile's car. Mr. McCune was general manager at that time, and he had the guts to take on the hydromatic when nobody else in the corporation would chance it. I was also fortunate right after the war in being the motor engineer when we developed the rocket V8 engine, high compression, short, compact, and very fuel efficient. The third very fortunate position that I had was at the time we developed the front wheel drive. My main part in that was selling it to the corporation. It was more expensive and quite different from anything we'd done before. Andy Watt had done a lot of the preliminary development of that front wheel drive. Cord automobile years before had a front wheel drive. It was moderately successful. They did not have an automatic transmission, and after a year or two, they dropped. At the time I became general manager, it was my style that I didn't pay much attention to details or really to micromanaging anything. People were given a project and they were expected to know everything that was about it and to get information to me and to make the whatever project they had to make a success of it. And in the procedure, a lot of very, very successful people were developed. I think that might be all that I want to say, but I'll be glad to answer questions.
Okay, you've certainly given us a very significant wrap-up of your career. I'm sure there's nothing else you'd like to add yourself, the way you want it to appear?
Well, as I said, or inferred, I was very fortunate in having direct charge of the hydromatic, the V8 in right after the war, which Mr. Skinner, that was then general manager, and he pushed the thing tireless. The thing I think that really made the V8 engine and made everybody else in the corporation go to it was the fact that we, or rather Mr. Skinner, insisted on putting it in the 88, relatively small car. He had the fortitude to resist almost the entire corporation who thought the engine was too much engine for a small car. As it happened, I had a part in that also, in that I had taken a number of long cross-country trips and decided that the car with the 88, particularly with a new V8 engine, was quite unique in that the performance was outstanding. The fuel economy was very good compared to what we had before. And I, after taking several long trips, I talked to Skinner enthusiastically about the car, the engine in that small car. He was also quite enthusiastic, and he pushed it in spite of many people on the 14th floor that didn't want to see us put that engine in so small a car. Within a year, Pontiac, Buick, even Chevrolet decided they must have a new engine. It must be a high compression. It must be a V8. And later, the rest of the industry, meaning at that time, Ford and Chrysler, also shifted over to V8, a high compression. Prior to that time, straight 8 engines or 6-cylinder engines were predominant. A few interesting things that happened. I'll go back to the hydromatic. I was in New York for the New York Auto Show. And about, well, I probably was the last year before the war. And General Manager had decided to go into production, advertise it quite a bit, and that was the first really successful automatic transmission. To get back to my story, for some reason or other, from New York, late on a Saturday night, several of us who had been at the New York show decided to drive down to Philadelphia. When I got back at maybe 3 o'clock in the morning, there was a call from Mr. McEwen, who wanted me to come back immediately to be there when the first hydromatics were put into Oldsmobiles. So, regardless of loss of sleep, I managed to get a hold of the airport and book a flight very early on Sunday morning. The plant was working on assembling cars with the hydromatic, even on a Sunday. So I went down there and spent most of the night without any real trouble developing. And I sure showed up the next day, all day. And then, having been about 48 hours without sleep, I went home. So that was the start of the hydromatic. Unfortunately, a few hydromatics developed a thing which we called steamboat whistle. And it was exactly what we called it. It sounded like a steamboat whistle. And we were unable, or the transmission division was unable to quickly correct it. So engineering, meaning me as a transmission engineer, for the next 3 or 4 months, I had to inspect every single hydromatic that went out over Oldsmobile's name to see that it didn't have steamboat whistle. Of course, we were working frantically, both us and the transmission division, to find out what the trouble was. It wasn't until at least April, and about 5,000 cars had passed inspection in the experimental department that we were able to correct the trouble. It was a rapid oscillation of the reverse gear, which caused the whistle. And it occurred only in a few cars, but it was so obnoxious that we felt we could not have any of them go out that way. So, for the several months between maybe October and April, I found myself working weekends, holidays, excepting only Christmas. And not only I, but two or three others having responsibility for the hydromatic also worked without thinking about time or holidays or weekends. And then the new V8 we built about 30 of them in the experimental department with our own machine shop by hand. And when production started, there turned up a very annoying clatter in most of the engines that was caused by valve lifters. It was decided instead of stopping production that they would go ahead and build engines until we found the cause. Of course, we had other engines, older engines, that were built in some of the cars. This was at the very introduction of the new V8. Until such a time as 5,000 engines with defective lifters were built. We were unable to find out what caused it. I cannot remember right now what it was, but I'll tell you, seeing 5,000 engines stacked up on a warehouse floor was quite an incentive to finding the answer. So that was some of the troubles we had when we went to particularly new things. And that was probably some of the reasons that other divisions at that time did not want to go into unknown areas, such as completely new engines and automatic transmission. But later on, competition forced the whole industry to go to those things. That's it. If you have some other questions,
You mentioned you began in 1928. Our records showed you were an experimental tester. What was your job?
my job was in the engine testing lab, and just an interesting sidelight. I was told
Oh, we're in business again.
uh, I think that I said that I was told that I was one of only two college graduates in Oldsmobile at that time. That was kind of interesting, if true. But I knew of only one, and he was a graduate of forestry at Michigan State. I knew only one other college graduate. There may have been a, but anyhow, my job at the start was to devise various performance and endurance tests on bumpers, axles, almost any part of the car, various engine parts. Where we didn't have a specific test, and my job was to devise those kinds of tests.
See, hey, let me ask you now about that same time, Oldsmobile had a basketball team too, didn't they?
Oldsmobile had a basketball team.
You play out?
I played on that basketball team.
Tell me.
I cannot remember a great deal. That it was a kind of fashion in those days that many industrial plants had basketball teams. They had basketball or baseball teams. I had played basketball in college. So I was a center on Oldsmobiles basketball team. I remember nothing more about
Was Oldsmobile's team a good team? Did they win? Do you remember any?
I,
Good or bad?
I think probably not too good. But I don't remember at all. I played center. I had prior to Oldsmobile, I had spent a year teaching and coaching in a small community high school. And then I had gone to Western Electric Company in Chicago, which was then part of AT&T. I spent a year there. And then when I wasn't satisfied with the progress that I had made, I got a job at Oldsmobile and stayed for 41 years.
Says a lot for you and for the company. Say, now, if you came in at 28, Mr. Metzel, you must have been there when the Vikings.
I sure was. The Viking was less than a success. It had a conventional V8 engine and I don't know exactly why it failed. I think it was a combination of the time, which occurred, I think, introduced in 1932 when big when the big I haven't got the word right now.
We built the Viking in 1929 and 1930.
Okay, I thought it was 32, but anyhow, it was the beginning of the Depression. I think that was one thing that caused a failure. And the other thing, the engine was it was a new engine, it was pretty big and clumsy, I thought. But I don't remember much about that. Yes, it was a V8. It was not high compression. And I think it was used only in the Viking.
Yeah.
And it was a relatively high-priced car at the beginning or just before the big depression.
Do you remember any specific tests on it or any?
No, I don't.
Let's move on. You mentioned the hydromatic, and the forerunner was the automatic safety transmission.
Yeah, the 1 year before we actually, well, the transmission was invented and designed by a man named Earl Thompson.
Earl Thompson.
Earl Thompson.
Earl Thompson.
He sold it to the corporation. First as a semi-automatic.
That about 1935, 36.
And that was a little later. I would say 38. And he originally he was assigned to work at and with Cadillac. Cadillac had little or no interest in it. They were not interested at that time in that kind of hazardous development. So Mr. McCune, as I once said, decided that Oldsmobile would take it on. And we did with moderate success. It was only, I say, I'm talking about the semi-automatic. Uh, Buick was induced, I'll say, to also use that semi-automatic. I say semi-automatic because what it really did, it had two ranges of gearing, first and second, and then it had what was called a fluid flywheel, which made it unnecessary to have a clutch. So with that semi-automatic, it shifted from first to second, and then it had to be manually shifted to third, but without a clutch. So it was just a matter of moving a lever, and it had third and fourth gear with a, I'll say, a kick down arrangement where after it was in fourth gear, top gear, drive, it could be downshifted into third by depressing the pedal beyond a certain point. And as I say, that was not particularly successful. It was a novelty without a clutch. Other people, namely Chrysler, had developed a fluid flywheel, which gave them the ability to delete the clutch, but little else. The following year, or maybe in 41, I'm not sure whether it's 40 or 41, the fully automatic transmission that made all the shifts automatically and did not have a clutch, but a fluid flywheel also. That was developed by us and the transmission division, which had then become an became automatically another division of General Motors, with us Olds as the only client, the only user. Buick, Mr. Curtis at the time was at Buick, and he wanted no part of it after the limited success of the semi-automatic.
The Hydromatic was introduced in the fall of '39 on 1940 Oldsmobile.
Probably a 40 model, right before the.
You were mentioning some of the engineers that you worked with. Youngren, you mentioned Mr. Youngren. No.
Yeah, Harold Youngwood was transferred from assistant chief engineer at Buick to Oldsmobile. Harold was really a designer and a good one, but mostly he was a designer, and he designed over several years some drive lines and rear suspension that were quite successful. At that time, Wolfram was an experimental engineer, and I was kind of interested in all parts of the car, and I sort of worked myself into anything which was troubles, and as a result, I took a lot of test trips with Wolfram and some with Younger. At that time, we mostly made test trips to the Pittsburgh area, Cincinnati for Hills, and Knoxville, Tennessee for the mountains of Tennessee around Knoxville and Chattanooga. So we lived, I probably spent maybe 2 weeks out of each month. Not formally, but that's about what it turned out to be. Maybe 2 weeks of each month on the road. We got to know the cars very intimately, and in that way became excellent judges of what was good, what the public would accept, and what we would do for a new model. The while I'm on that, I must say that Lowell Kindy was probably the best judge of what an automobile should be that I have ever seen. I was no slouch myself, but he was really good. He could take a car and in maybe 20 or 30 miles of driving, know what the defects were, what was not necessarily what was a fix, but what needs to be worked on. He later, when Buick was in rather bad strait, he later was transferred to Buick as a chief engineer and did a fine job for them. And ultimately became head of engineering for the entire corporation as a vice president.
Well, now, that must have been in the late 30s.
So that was much later in the middle 60s.
Well, I mean, you speaking first about Mr. Youngren.
Youngren came to us probably, in the late 30s. And he he left Oldsmobile right after the war due to a misunderstanding with Mr. Skinner. Skinner was very, very much interested in new things. And Harold had done quite a lot of innovative design on a 20 millimeter cannon for aircraft, which I said that I was in charge of. Youngren was quite active. He approached things by making wooden models, and he probably made a mistake of talking about that wooden model too many times. Skinner couldn't. He wanted to see something in metal design. So Harold had a misunderstanding with Skinner, and he later went to Ford. I think as an automatic transmission expert, which maybe he was, but he was a very good designer and a good administrator.
What about Bob Stemple? Now, you mentioned him, too.
Bob Stemple.
Shall we get a drink of water, Harold? You think? Okay.
Bob Stemple worked for us probably in the probably came to us in the middle 50s, somewhere around there. And he was a chassis designer. John Belt had much more to do with him than I did. Of course, I knew him as a very competent designer, but under Belt, he really developed. Later went to the corporation as Eddie Cole's engineering expert when Cole was president of the corporation. And from there, I think he went to Germany with Opel, and probably, if I remember correctly, had a stay at Chevrolet as a general manager. I believe probably that Chevrolet part was prior to his assignment to Europe. Not only did he become chairman of the board, but also Bob Schultz, who had worked on body engineering for us, at the same time became vice chairman of the board. And earlier, Pete Estes, who worked with Gilbert Burrow on the rocket engine, had gone to Pontiac as the chief engineer, then as general manager, and later as Chevrolet general manager before he became president of the corporation. In my judgment, had John Belt lived, and he died only about 3 years after he took on the job as Oldsmobile general manager and the vice president. Had he lived, I am almost certain that he would have followed Pete Estes as president. He had that kind of ability, and I think the corporation recognized.
You've been doing a lot of talking. You want to rest a moment before you go on?
Oh, I cannot emphasize too much the part that I cannot emphasize too much the part that our experimental department played in the success of Oldsmobile, particularly that trip. I believe, I do not really know about it firsthand, but I believe that today much of the testing is done by computer. I don't know about that. I know that we knew our cars. We drove many miles. I probably, in the first 10 years I was at Olds, I probably drove test maybe 3 million miles. Spent uncounted time. We later, after going to Pittsburgh and Tennessee and those close by places, the corporation set up in Phoenix what was called a desert proving ground. Actually, the desert proving ground was just a shop on about 4 or 5 acres in what is now surrounded by shops, residences. We did all of our on the roads until traffic got so bad that we couldn't do towing tests, performance tests where you time the acceleration. We couldn't do that on a public highway. And the desert proving ground at what is now called Mesa.
When did that come into?
About 1950, thereabouts. And I think the corporation bought 4 or 5 sections of desert terrain, which was operation realized that we couldn't go on doing formal testing on the highway because of traffic. And they bought several sections of desert land and made a 5-mile high-speed truck at the formal tests were made there, but we still did a great deal of cross-country driving. We spent a lot of time on Pike Peak in Colorado and on the high passes on the roads in Colorado, many of which were 7, 8, 10,000 feet high. And we still continued. In fact, I think that we might have tested our cars in all of the lower 48 states except maybe Florida and Maine. Personally, I think I was in all the rest of the states on the road testing our cars, also once or twice in Mexico, down around Veracruz, where we, before the proving ground was established in Mesa, we a couple of times went down around Veracruz, Tampico on the East Coast in the winter to check cooling. And the chief engineer, at least once that I can remember, chief engineer from the radiator company went along with me and about 3 cars to Mexico. And one time, after the war, I was on a hunting trip at the time in the Canadian Rockies, and I sent a car up to Alaska and down on the Alaska Highway, which was built militarily during the war. And I met the cars in middle of British Columbia in Fort Nelson and spent a day or two with them after I'd been hunting. So I cannot minimize how much it meant to Oldsmobile to be completely familiar with all the driving characteristics of all of our cars.
As opposed to a computer.
Yeah, I shouldn't criticize computers because they were just coming in as I was leaving, retired. But I suspect if I were had anything to do with automobile engineering, I would still want to do a lot of cross-country driving. I think that was the key to our success. We did much more than most of the other divisions did at that time. They may have done more after I left, I don't know.
Well, now you had mentioned, getting back to the rocket engine, you had mentioned that there was some a resistance to putting that engine in
Very, very much.
as opposed to putting it in the 98.
Yeah, you probably know we had an A body, a B body, and a C body. The 88 was, well, it wasn't exactly small, but it was lighter than either the B or the C. And that engine just brought that car to life. It was a joy to drive it. I can remember one time when later years, I used to fly to meet the car so I wouldn't take so much time away from my job in the plant. And I remember coming to Phoenix when we had a new rocket engine in the 88. And I personally, with a driver, professional hourly driver, sitting in the back seat, drove all the way from Phoenix to Santa Fe, New Mexico, because I enjoyed it. It's about 550 miles. And I suppose it was 8 or 10 hours, but I enjoyed it enough, and I went back and talked to Skinner and Wolfram, and of course Wolfram was familiar, and I think I was somewhat instrumental in him taking a strong stand to put that in the 88 against all corporations. Everything they could do short of just saying, don't. They didn't do that in those days.
You also mentioned it was more economical than prior engines.
It was more economical because of high compression. And I should say something about that. When that engine was, or when the high compression V8 was first proposed, filling stations did not have the kind of gasoline that would work in it. Wasn't high enough in octane rating. Mr. Kettering, in charge of research, had first built for themselves a high compression V8 similar to what we later, from his encouragement, from which we later designed the rocket engine. And when we take trips, first, we'd have to go to airports to get gasoline on 90 octane. Wasn't available. Later on, Oldsmobile sort of took the lead. I think it was with either, I think it was Texaco. Texaco. Could have been, yeah, it was with Texaco. We told them that we were going to build such an engine. Cadillac also built a high compression V8, and they probably worked with the gasoline company. The gasoline companies were not anxious to supply that kind of gasoline because it took an entirely different technology, and I believe they said they could get less high test gasoline out of a gallon of a barrel of oil than they could what was being supplied then. But eventually, we finally got them to agree to furnish maybe one pump, and of course the other fuel company, because of competition, got into it too. And after we had to keep close to major airports to make cross-country trips, Texaco would supply us with little vials, little tubes of tetraethylene, which is a bad word now. But they would supply us, we'd carry in the trunk tetraethylene for the kind of gasoline that maybe was 85 octane. I don't remember exactly, but we'd carry a whole bunch of those little tubes. And when we'd fill up with gas, we'd pour one or two of those little, yeah, we'd pour one or two depending on how much gas we took on. And that was the only way we could run cross country. That was interesting.
Well, do you remember, now you said economical, how many miles to the gallon did the engine get before the rocket engine as compared with the rocket engine gasoline mileage?
I would say 20 to 25% more. It fuel economy varies with speed, so it's hard to say you get so many gallons. But yeah, it depends on a lot of things. But generally, my impression was that it was maybe 25% better. And they used to use a figure of acceleration from a standing start still to 60 miles an hour. And then how much time elapsed. And in the pre-rocket engine cars was 16 or 17 seconds. In the rocket engine, 88. It was 10 to 12 seconds. Very substantially better.
Well, you mentioned the different fuel for the rocket engine, or higher octane. What other alternate fuels or power plants do the factory work on while you were there?
None.
No experimentation on anything different than gasoline.
That's right. At that time, that was long before the gas or the oil embargo in the middle of 70 or 73. But we didn't have, we worked on refining the engine. I think research might have been working on what we would call a jet engine. And later, after I left, there was a brief flurry, mainly from Chrysler. They built a few cars, got a lot of publicity for their jet engines that had become very popular in airplanes. And research, mainly Mr. Catherine, had done quite a lot of work with diesel engines, particularly for trucks. Diesel, in spite of the fact that there was a great flurry of that in some foreign cars, and Oldsmobile, after my time, built a diesel engine. A diesel is not adaptable really to an automobile which have variable speeds, variable loads. Diesels are at their best when with trucks, when they're or locomotives, when they build up to a speed and keep it there, not up and down, and uphill and downhill. Diesels require, for the best efficiency, full throttle operation. In other words, throttle to the floor. And the closer to the floor and the closer to constant speed, the more efficient they are. No good for company.
What about racing? You were there when we were in the police car. We furnished police cars and the special duty, heavy duty options. And then as a result, we introduced the 442 in mid-year 64.
Yeah.
What about Oldsmobile's racing interests?
I probably was a minimum of enthusiasm for racing. We had a chap, Don Perkins, who was very much into stock car racing, that created with the public, particularly in the Southeast, Carolinas and Georgia, a great deal of interest in the dealers and the public. Of course, the dealers liked anything that got publicity. The only thing that I was much interested in probably should have been more in, but I was a Mexican Baja California run. Right the first year that we had the rocket engine in the 88, maybe the second year, somebody, whatever, the first or second year, somebody proposed entering a car in the Baja California, Lower California Mexican race. I think it was about 800 miles over terrible from Ensenada down to the end of the peninsula, wherever the road went. It was largely ungraded and full of turns. I had been over little of it, and I didn't think that we belonged in that kind of business. The people that went into it always asked for financial support, and I figured we could spend our money better. But this one guy got an awful lot of publicity by winning the Baja California run. It was known as a car killer, and he won hands down. Yeah, an 88 was supposed to be a stock car. I don't know what, if anything, he did. I don't think we gave him much money. Not that I'm aware of. And the other thing you might say racing, on, I think on Labor Day in Colorado Springs. They have a race up Pikes Peak. Pikes Peak at the top is about 14,000 feet. It's highest peak. No, it's the second highest peak in the lower states. And there's a one peak in California that's a little higher. And in Alaska, one peak is much higher. But anyhow, we got into the Pikes Peak race 2 or 3 years. I don't know how we got into that. Probably Don Perkins. He was promoting stock car racing and racing in general, and we kind of assigned him that without very much support from me.
Did he report to you?
Yeah. Or really, I don't think he got much support from Wolf, who was then chief engineer. Later on, the corporation frowned on it when it became criticized in the press. And Pontiac and Chevrolet were in the racing strongly. Pontiac made quite a career on it. But I figured we could spend our money better than with subsidizing racing. So we didn't do much of it, other than Pikes Peak and the Mexican Run.
Well, how could Pontiac go ahead with this racing and the factory frowning on it? If Wolf,
A frown is exactly what they did. As I said, they rarely said no, except if you required a lot of money.
well, what if you wanted to buy some more land to build a building, or you needed new machines?
Well, that the corporation got into that very strongly in the big month. That was the only discipline really that the corporation exerted at that time. They would say, don't do that. I don't think you should do that. But if you persisted, and it didn't take a lot of appropriation, Pontiac, I can only speculate. They probably took money out of their advertising budget. I don't know, but somewhat they and Chevrolet made money available to subsidize racing. We did not.
I wanted to ask you something else here. We passed it a second ago. were you there when we had the air ride program? How did that come to pass? Air ride, kind of that suspension system that was.
I doubt if that was it.
General managers, what was the selection process of a general manager? How was that decision made?
I really don't know. But the corporation made the decision. I think they had to be pretty knowledgeable about the individual. Probably, I don't think there was very much personal advertising or personal.
We're all set again.
I don't believe many people, particularly tried, made a conscious effort to become general manager. At least I know the corporation, because of many contacts with engineering in my many years, I became familiar with many of the top people. So I suppose they just decided Wolfram had a couple of heart attacks, and he or a doctor decided, or the corporation decided he should quit. And I was appointed. I don't know.
There had been kind of a history at Oldsmobile of general managers were prior chief engineers. And
Well, yes and no. McCune was a design engineer and then took over the general managership, and Skinner came in from some part of Fisher Body. I don't remember. But of course, when Skinner left, then chief engineer Wolfram.
you had worked.
Yeah, I've worked for him years. Probably a controversy as far as I'm concerned. He was a terrifically hard worker, worked for Oldsmobile all the time. Some of his methods might have been questionable. I think, had a bad habit of scaring hell out of people. Maybe to the point where they didn't do their best. He and I never had that kind of experience. I have nothing but respect for him. It's such a hard, but I say the methods might not have been the best, but he was very effective as a general manager and also a chief engineer, and had a great deal to do with Oldsmobile's success between the end of the war and the time he resigned or retired. Yeah, great.
How was Oldsmobile viewed by the corporation and by other divisions, Mr. Metzel? Actually, we had the reputation, did we, of being innovators?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say with some envy, but they probably wouldn't admit it. But we did do a lot of innovating, not only in transmission, in engines, and front wheel drive. I was criticized a lot, and at the time that tornado, all my time, I don't think it ever made any money. It was too expensive. But look what happened. Everybody had to go to front wheel drive. So we were right. But it would be very difficult for other divisions to admit that. And we did a lot of things, take air conditioning. Now, I think Packard might have had air conditioning a year or two before we were not very successful. We took on the air conditioning. Pretty crude. We had down the sides, just from front to back to distribute air. But when Cadillac found we were going to air conditioning, they had to have it. And so did in the year to everybody else. All kinds of little things like that. We started, and if anybody found it out early enough, they had to have it.
Now, while we're on new things, what about the F-85 with the aluminum engine? What was the thinking behind that?
The F-85 was designed between us and Peoria because Volkswagen, for the first time for a foreign car, made a lot of inroads in they built a lot of cars and became somewhat competitive, probably more Chevrolet than us, but they did eat into the lower end. We built the aluminum engine and along with Fisher body and Scott designed the body for the F-85. And we'd have, I was going to say weekly, but maybe it was bi-weekly, with Buick and the Fisher body. We kind of, as much as we could, dominated the body style, what the side would be, and many people wanted to have to not have a frame, to use what was called a body frame integral. In other words, the frame would be built into the floor. I personally was against that. It was not as well insulated from noise. It was not as well insulated from shake. So in my lifetime at all, I probably killed by just hammering on at every possible opportunity, hammering that we didn't want to go without a frame. And finally, all the time I was there, we did not. Later, I'm not sure when, but in the 1970s, bodies were built with the frame in the floor. I'm against it. It's probably cheaper, but it does not make a better car. First, I think of the domestic cars, I think Chrysler went to it. And then it became popular to do because I think it was cheaper. But the insulation was not there.
Now, the size, though, was predicated more on trying to get a size similar to Volkswagen.
Well, not similar, but smaller and light.
Reason for the aluminum engine,
Yeah,
why did we keep the aluminum?
was expensive. Oh, not very long. I don't remember 2 or 3 years.
It's more expensive than the other type.
Yeah, we had aluminum head.
The block wasn't.
It was not. And later on, the aluminum was developed so they could put sleeves of steel in the aluminum. But the block wasn't, but the manifolds, at least the intake and the head, and probably other minor parts were lower. So we might probably save, I don't remember, but no doubt, 100 pounds.
What about the jet fire engine that came along in 62 and 63, that turbocharged fluid injected? What prompted that?
It wasn't fluid injection. It was, in effect, no. It was a blower, supercharger, if you will. That was one way to get more power without making the engine bigger. There was a little fan that drew air in and put into the intake manifold, in the carburetor, more air, and of course it used more fuel, but it was, we thought, a cheaper way than making a big engine. But we later found out that we had to have so many things that modified the engine control, so many controls, that it became a monstrosity. After 2 or 3 years, it was dropped. It did reduce our standing start to 0 to 60 from about 10 seconds to 8.5 or 9. It was good for squidding the tires, but it was too expensive with all the controls.
Well, let's get back to transmissions. When the Detroit hydromatic division burned and we used Dynaflows, was there a problem adapting that transmission to Oldsmobile?
Not really, but it wasn't anything that we liked. The Dynaflow was very sluggish in starting. There was a lot of slippage. It was very smooth. In fact, the chief engineer of Peoria and I had a joke. I would call a Dynaflow the Dyna Slip, and he would call a hydromatic the Hydro Jerk. So the downfall was smoother, very slick. The hydromatic in the early days had quite a bump when it went from one gear to another, particularly on down. So that was the whole thing. We didn't like it, wasn't a good performer, wasn't a good economy because it slipped so much.
Well, now, to get Hydromatic Division back in production as fast as they did car divisions and other divisions help with that? Did they send engineers?
I would say no. Skinner alone, who was then head of the not the car divisions, but of all of the accessory divisions. He had the hydromatic, and before the fire was out, he was down flying with hydromatic. What they would do, how they would get their machinery, where they'd move to. They went to Willow Run Airport, which was then a Ford airplane factory during the war. I think it was vacant then, but Skinner, within 6 months, because of his planning and his knowledge of the machinery people, had, I would say, almost single-handedly did that. We had nothing to do with it at all.
See here, we covered about everything. You mentioned the Toronado. Was that difficult to sell, this front wheel drive, when we brought it out?
Not really, but it was on a limited production. Well, at all the time I was there, we never sold more than 40,000. It was, I'd say, more expensive, but it wasn't. I was going to look up what the first tornado caused. I didn't do it. I forgot.
A lot less.
I have a record by the number of cars that I have bought, including the first year of the tornado. I know, but I have a record about what it cost, but I forgot to look at them. The people that bought the tornado were not only very pleased, but amazed at how well it handled. And of course, in either mud or ice, it had no piers. And it handled very well under all conditions.
You mentioned Gilbert Burrow as an excellent engineer.
Gilbert Burrow was, without question, the best engine designer, not only in the corporation, in the whole industry. And in the late years, I think that General Motors realized that. In fact, I think Pete Estes sent him over to England for a month or so to get them out of some trouble they had with it, and that was after my time. But I know that Pete did send him over there. Gilbert, I think that he reached 65, but he died soon after, or maybe he died just before. I'm not sure.
What about Skip Butler was in engineering, wasn't he? Did you work with him?
Butler worked for, well, I don't have any
These are just
particularly reading. He was a good man, but there were a lot of good men.
Dale Smith. Was he there when you were there? Dale Smith,
I don't recognize it.
Jack,
Right. But
safety engineer.
yeah, I again, he was a good man, and I'm kind of vague on what he did.
Okay. Now, and you went down to Detroit often as a vice president of General Motors, Mr. Metzel. Those meetings. What happened at those meetings?
The general manager was a member of the what the corporation called the administrative committee. All general managers and the president and the chairman and even the overseas representative vice president all attended those meetings once a month, every month, scheduled on a certain day. The main purpose was for the general manager to report to the president and the chairman anything he wanted to report. Mostly, you didn't report trouble because it was up to you to get out of it. And I did. And if you reported trouble, all you got was a large telephone call. How'd you fix it? When did you fix it? So we worked on our own trouble. But we did report, I believe, our sales and our sales expectation for the next few months. And if the corporation, meaning the president or the chairman, wanted any or all divisions to do certain things, they would tell one or all of us what they wanted. Most, it was a matter of getting information to them. I was always amazed at the breadth of the overseas manager, what he knew about, well, whatever, India, Korea, Argentina, and of course, England or France. They knew a lot of the politics. He knew a lot of the politics of what was going on. I was vastly impressed.
Do you remember his
The one that impressed me most retired 3-4 years before I did. Pete Estes took his place. I remember he'd also had a good knowledge. They went all over the world. South Africa, India, Arabia, and I was completely taken with how much he knew. The chairman was usually interested. At that time, we sold buses. He was very interested in the politics of national purchase of buses. That's my main memory of that. And it was kind of interesting to see what all the general managers would talk about. Like I said, most of them didn't talk about the trouble. Corporation that fix them, we fix our own.
Well, now, do you remember any major troubles Oldsmobile had during your tenure?
All kinds.
All kinds.
No,
I see.
I don't remember specific. The one thing that was a little interesting, I say I built, I designed 3 different engineering departments, and it had a lot to do with the present administration building. I started to say that when you talk building, the corporation was heavily into that by way of appropriating money. To start at the beginning, I don't remember any details, but engineering moved from one of those buildings in the middle of the yard out onto the street. And that was the first move. And then
Let's see, this is the building 70 or the new engineering building?
I'm talking about, I'm not sure numbers, but
administration?
No, I'm talking about the first move from where the manufacturing engineering now then was in the middle of the yard.
About building 40?
Yeah, I think maybe that tracks our memory. Building 40. We built an I plan with Wolfram, but he turned it over mostly to me. When we went out on Old Avenue, right by one of the gates, the engineering, that probably occurred right after the war. I don't remember that. But then the next thing, we had to expand over on the south side of the street where there was a new experimental garage and their offices and the drafting room.
Now, that would be building 64 that had the auditorium?
Well, originally, I don't know. I think that building 64.
That was on the south side of Wolf Avenue. And on the north side,
I meant that building is on the north.
yeah, that's building 66.
Yeah, the that building had an auditorium and a viewing place for New Month that people couldn't see. The auditorium you're thinking of is the big old auditorium. But anyhow, we designed the new office building on the north side of the street. And then Wolfram got as the general manager, got the original appropriation for the new office building down on Townsend.
The administration building.
Administration, yeah. And
Now, does that money come from the corporation to do things like that?
oh yeah, they appropriated and
But you had to build to buy up some lots, houses, and
all before that, I suspect that we had bought that for parking. We had all that to the north from Townsend clear down to Logan was all one, and that new building, of course, was on the south side. I don't know whether we owned it or not, but the corporation, in what particularly the chairman, and I shouldn't forget his name, but it slipped me. He was very adamant that they must be within the budget. And one of the first things that I did. I criticized the exterior. It was a, a mixture of stone and cement. Miserable, I guess. Gray or brown. And I made a big play at the central office to use marble. And that cost an additional $50,000. So I got, I, again, I've forgotten her name. I got the guy that had charge of building up there to look at some of that miserable conglomerate, and he agreed with me. And I think it set the building back about a month. They had to hang those marble uh, panels onto the building, and they had some other way of using that conglomerate. I don't know the details, but I finally agreed, and the chairman was very concerned that we wouldn't. We'd go over the budget. He said, not a dime. He told me two or three times. Dick Elliott was very helpful in that the building also included new furniture, and for some way Dick manipulated that so it didn't come out of the budget. I didn't want to know too much about it, but he did. And we used to confer about once a month how we were doing. And the controller of the corporation was always on his tail, too. But anyhow, we got most of the new furniture and some of the interior entrance by taking my manipulation. But anyhow, we had a good looking building.
Now, was there some plan later for adding in that south part, building additional stories?
Not that I know. But it could be that it was. And the thing must have been designed that way. I forgot. But it was a lot of fun. I remember coming out here and only a little detail. I should even talk about that. Do you remember in General Manager's secretary's office, there was a great glass panel, colored glass with Oldsmobile arrows. That was our kind of
The rocket and
yeah, right. Well, that was, anyhow, I saw that thing out here, design of it, and I found out who did. Some guy down in Scottsdale, and I went down and told him what I'd like to do. And he said he could do it for $15,000. We didn't have 15, but I went back and talked to Dick, and we finally screwed out some way to get the thing. It was very decorative. And
You have so many interesting.
that was fun. And when we showed the corporation president and vice or president and chairman the new building, the first thing he said, Metz, I'd like to see your office. And it was a nice big office. And he mumbled a little bit, and he went out and he saw Jack Gordon, who was president. And he said, Jack, have you been in Metz's new office? And he said, you've been living in the slum. So he was quite impressed.
Still is a beautiful building.
Yes, it is. And I got a lot of pleasure out of that because the old building was so old and inadequate. But when that thing was knocked down, they found that the construction was something. They had to bring in great balls, swinging balls to knock it down. It took them a lot of time. That office building was new when I started. It was probably built in. Oh, I thought it might have been finished a little before, but I think you're right. Yeah, I did see that.
That coincided with the introduction of the Vikings.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think McCune had his office over there. First general manager, he probably got the money.
Well, do you? I noticed you had some notes here. Have you gone through all of them?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I don't think. I don't think there's.
I think I pretty well covered the questions. I certainly appreciate your signing our interview agreement, and that'll be a kept and preserved in the Oldsmobile History Center.
A lot of things were kind of interesting and long gone. Nothing like that'll ever happen again.
Your time in things preserve history.
Well, I think it's great that you took that up and that Olds agreed to, it must have been, yeah. And I think they were very smart in that Olds is the oldest domestic manufacturer.
States, it certainly is.
Yeah.
Yes. So your contribution today is a very significant one. I want to thank you.
Well, I probably talked too much about little details that are not.
Something posterity. We appreciate that.